have you recovered from your protest injury, Harrison?
Oh yes, I recovered. They didn't get Sam and I as much as I think they were hoping to, but that's just how they do things, right? Antifa, they have the black umbrella. It's the symbol of Antifa's presence these days. What I've noticed is they always try to cover you up, and then whatever they want to do afterwards, they can basically have free reign once you're out of the camera. They put the umbrella over top. They try to cover the camera up. It's absurd, really. But I think even what's more absurd is that these Palestinian protesters who had been protesting for 2 months, protesting a genocide, capitulated on the day that they were actually going to be cleared out. They couldn't even stand their ground. I found that to be remarkably cowardly, if you ask me.
So my takeaway from this is that if I'm ever at a protest and the black umbrella comes out, that's my cue that I'm in trouble. Things are about to get bad.
Yes.
Fair enough. Beware the umbrella. All right, let's get this going. Hello and welcome to you all. This is another edition of Off the Record, where we kick back in a casual setting and analyze the week that, I don't know if analyze is too serious a word. We just kick back and dish about it. Hope you are settled in and ready for the ride. The last few weeks have been tremendous train wrecks, but we've had fun on the train wreck. This time we've got a crack crew of professionals. We'll try to keep the train on the rails, but if not, it'll be more fun. So whatever happens. Que sera, sera. It is my privilege to be hosting this show. I'm Andrew Lawton, joined by Harrison Faulkner, host of Ratioed and The Faulkner Show, and Rachel Emanuel, host of Alberta Roundup, and Rachel Parker. I did it. Okay, Rachel Parker, and we congratulate her very much on this tremendous milestone, host of Rachel and the Republic, which just launched on True North last week as well. But good to have you both. Thanks for the judgmental head shake, Rachel.
Anytime. I'm always here for some judgment.
Fair enough. So we have lots going on this week. We're going to, I think, go around the world, but tell me about the new show. How's that going for you so far?
Yeah, it's great. So for our audience, I will be covering the American election in the coming weeks. The show is called Rachel and the Republic. So that will be released every Wednesdays. I was typically doing 2 episodes of the Alberta Roundup. So we're going to take a pause from that for the time being. But there's no shortage of things. It's actually a totally different ballpark covering American politics, because it's like you're receiving major updates almost hourly. And so I feel like it's just totally different than what I'm used to. And I'm going to have to kind of play around with it. I think the news is stale much quicker than it is for my typical show. And it's also just obviously a much more competitive field. There's so many people covering American politics, but it's a ton of fun. I think this is going to be one of the most exciting elections ever. I will be going to the States to be doing some on the ground coverage. So yeah, I'm really excited about the coming weeks.
Nice. We should have gotten you to do a UK election show, Harrison. Like, I don't know, Harrison in the Motherland or something.
I would have been up. I would have been up for that, Andrew. I was. I have to say, it did cross my mind to pitch that a few months ago, but never got around to it. But it would have been fun.
Well, we'll get it out of your system this episode. We'll do some UK election breakdown in just a little while, but we'll start with Canada. We are a Canadian show. This is every Canadian of a certain age knows the Heritage Minute. Like, they still make them, but I don't think they have the cultural relevance that they used to. These things are produced by an organization which used to be on the front lines of preserving and documenting and communicating Canadian history, Historica Canada. And you can't talk about Canada's history without talking about Canada's founding, Confederation, John A Macdonald, a great period of time. And this was memorialized maybe commemorated is the better word, in one Heritage Minute that I want to share for you right now.
Careful. That champagne cost a fortune.
Mr. Macdonald, do you plan to bribe the entire delegation?
Our methods may differ, Mr. Brown, but our objective is the same.
My objective, sir, is honest talk.
And mine is to win.
Gentlemen, enough. We must convince the Maritimes, or there will be no confederation.
Aye, George. Today, civil war grips America. How long before they look to our borders again?
Separated, the colonies are isolated and weak.
But united. Just imagine. To the east, the Atlantic provinces, then Upper and Lower Canada, across the prairies to the Rockies and beyond. A new country made one by a railway from sea to sea. Gentlemen, the time for union is now. I ask you to take the dare.
The Charlottetown Conference set Confederation in motion. On July 1st, 1867, Sir John A Macdonald became Canada's first Prime Minister.
That's hate speech. Got to get rid of that. Believe it or not, Historica Canada has deleted that. They've removed it from YouTube quite quietly. Our colleague Cosmin Georgia reached out to them and asked why, and they gave a long answer, which we're very grateful for. But in this answer, they said that it was because they got, quote, feedback from educators, unquote, about his, quote, controversial, unquote, legacy and subsequent controversies. And they said that this was produced in 2015. It was before they learned about how he was a big, Haiti, white supremacist, neo-Nazi hate monger, that John A Macdonald or whatever it was. They said that there has been lots of discussion about Canada's history and the context of it, and Macdonald's so-called treatment of Indigenous peoples, which hadn't been entertained in 2015. Now, what's interesting is that this was not even a particularly laudatory piece about Macdonald. It was 60 seconds. It was the story of Confederation, but now it's been taken offline as they come up with a way to better, they view, position his legacy and all of these controversies. Now, I'm not even going to ask a question on this. I'm just going to say, Harrison, go.
You know what the problem with this clip is in the eyes of these radical left-wing educators? That's the name that Historica Canada gave to True North when we asked what exactly was going on here. The problem with it is that it actually paints Confederation in a positive and unifying light, right? They don't want you to think that this country is built on something other than racism, colonialism. They'll even throw in slavery because that's we know they actually believe that. They said that at the opening of Bellevue House, John A. Macdonald's monument, that somehow Canada is steeped in slavery, which of course it is not. It's just a lie. Everything about what these people are trying to do all comes back to this one core idea that we need to delegitimize Canada itself. We need to strike at the core of what this country is. We need to tear down all of our monuments, no matter what it takes. We'll lie about historical figures. We'll attack every single person.
Oh, sorry, you'd frozen there for a minute, but I think we got you back.
I'm back here. But no.
Historica Canada was taking you offline too.
Exactly. Now they're coming after us. It was only a matter of time, right? But no, it's just absurd. They have to attack every single historical person who has been involved in the creation of this country, so they can lie about our creation. They can lie about this country and say that actually none of it is legitimate. It was all built on racism.
What's your take on this, Rachel?
Listen, this might ruffle some feathers, Harrison, but it's just funny to me watching this video, the music they're portraying of hope and optimism. Poor Alberta. If only we knew what we were getting ourselves into, the mess that Canada would become, the raw deal that we would be getting from the federal government. We could have just stayed our own separate colony, been our own country, had our own energy, had our own wealth. Here we are years later. I think a lot of us are regretting what Confederation has become and hoping we can still turn things around, but very different perspective. Maybe we should be taking a look at the context of Canada and think, we've gone down a bad path. Hopefully it's not too late to sort things out and to get back on track.
Well, you guys didn't join for like another 50 years after that, though.
We were enjoying our wealth for a little longer. We should have just kind of continued down that path before we decided to start splitting up the share of our energy resources with the rest of Canada.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are lots of things that you can talk about in a Canadian context and disagree with. And certainly the West has, its fair share of grievances, some of which are, I think, legitimate. But the story of Confederation was also a tremendous one. If you looked at what he had to do, like we think, polarization is an issue now. At the time, it was as bad, if not worse. You had all of these different colonies that had their own agendas. You had all of these different disparate groups. You had the Tories and the Grits in, Canada East and Canada West. You had French-English divides. You had all of this. And you had a geography that was incredibly, incredibly hostile to anything resembling a national government. So I would say that, that actually didn't even go far enough to give credit to Macdonald and the founding fathers. But to say it's something that needs to be memory hold because of these so-called controversies is absurd.
Well, they try to make Macdonald. Of course, they use the usual attacks against Macdonald. The first line being about champagne and booze. again, trying to just make him seem like
in
a
fair,
caricature.
I don't think that's unfair.
I'm not saying
liquor.
I'm not saying it is unfair. That is part of the story, but it should be a small part of the story. It's the first line, as you point out, Andrew. It's not as though they make Macdonald out to be the hero that he really is. Of course, they put him at the center of the story of Confederation, which is true. But again, they just have to tear it down. They have to delete it because apparently to some, it glorifies racism. It glorifies colonialism. Obviously, I disagree with Rachel, and I think that of course, Canada is what makes Canada Canada is that it encompasses the prairies, it encompasses Quebec, it encompasses the Maritimes. That's what makes us such a special country. But again, these people need to be exposed. The people that are involved in Historica Canada should be ashamed of themselves. This is yet another example of the fact that in Justin Trudeau's Canada, celebrating Macdonald is strictly forbidden behavior.
Just to jump in on that, Rachel, I don't know if it's fair to blame Macdonald for the West's woes, because remember, he was the guy that wanted the West connected to the East. He was the guy that pushed for the Transcontinental Railway. So what say you to that?
I'm not blaming Macdonald for the Western woes. I'm just saying that if we look at the history of Canada, it seems like, you were saying, oh, this was such a monumental feat. And I agree with Harrison that it's shameful what Historica Canada has done when we're actually talking about whether this is a historical moment worth recognizing. Of course it was. My point was simply that so much has gone wrong since then. And when you, Andrew, are talking about, the colonies, the different territories and provinces, they were all very skeptical of the federal government. They all had their own interests. I think we actually need to get back to a bit more of that. I wish there was more skepticism of the federal government. I wish that the provinces had more authority to implement their own agenda without constant interference from the federal government. Here in Alberta, with Ottawa telling us we can't build roads if they're or highways, if they're too big of highways, we have to get approval now from Ottawa from that. So when we look at what Confederation has come, we look at what the federal government has done to our provinces and the way that it bootstrapped us. That is my point. The criticism lies within that. Of course, ridiculous that we can't talk about this historical moments without needing to have so-called educators come in and just do away with the monumental things that past historical figures have done. But I think there's also a conversation to be had there about what we've become as Canada and what the federal government has become and the way that they just have so much control over our individual lives and over provincial autonomy.
But I don't think you can have that conversation if you aren't able to have an honest discussion about your history as a country. I think that's the problem here is that, I mean, look, I would love for the West to tell its own history and the West to tell its own stories and do that. But if we can't have those discussions, there's no, that's why we end up in such a mess, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I don't have a problem with having that discussion. That was just simply the point that I was making. I think we've really gone awry, and I think that it's a shame what we've as people have allowed it. It really, the fault is honestly with the apathy largely of the Canadian people who continue to vote in these governments that have ceded so much control from us over our lives, and we vote them in time and time again.
Harrison, I'll give you the last word on this one.
Well, where to begin? I don't think anyone was having that kind of take when the Conservatives were in charge. And if that's the case, then maybe there is something to be said about that. But it obviously comes down to a disagreement with the federal Liberal government. I don't think the people in Alberta agree with this take that Alberta should be its own, should be separated from Confederation. I think if you put it to a referendum, it would be a shocking decision, a decisive victory to remain in this country. So, I mean, I think we obviously found a disagreement here, but I say, you know what? Give it to the people. Let the people decide. I'm pretty sure I know what the result will be.
I don't think that we're having a referendum on Alberta separation anytime soon.
Yeah.
I also think we're all in agreement on the actual topic we were starting out discussing here, which was the memory of John A. Macdonald's legacy. But we'll have to revisit the Western question on a future episode. But it's a natural segue into this one thing that you flagged for us this week, Rachel. What's going on at the Calgary Stampede, and specifically what's not going on?
Well, what the media is liking to peg as the controversy of the Calgary Stampede is that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will not be attending this year. It's not a controversy in Alberta. It's actually something that everyone is celebrating. He's not well liked in Alberta when he comes. He's dogged with protesters and hecklers. And, I was reading a CBC story about it today, and they said last year people were jockeying among crowds for selfies with Trudeau, and he joined the George Chahal Stampede breakfast. And it was like, no, people were yelling at him. the Liberal Party does their absolute best to keep his location top secret when they know that he's coming so that they don't have hecklers. You might remember a few months ago when he came to Alberta and they would just not tell anyone where he was meeting with Danielle. They wouldn't release the name of his press conference to anyone other than his approved journalist. I was asked to leave multiple locations throughout the day following him, trying to get a question. I wasn't even allowed on the road near his vehicle because the Prime Minister just couldn't be bothered to be bothered by me, a journalist in my hometown, which is just mind-boggling, the censorship that we're seeing from the Prime Minister himself. So he's very unpopular in Alberta. We know that he faced a devastating loss in Toronto. He's obviously embarrassed. I think everyone thinks maybe that he will resign soon. He probably will never come to the Calgary Stampede again. So definitely a sense of relief from people in Alberta and Calgary that the Prime Minister won't be coming to the Stampede this year. It's just such a bad show for him. Every year when he comes, he leaves looking so foolish and looking very embarrassing. I think we have that clip of him flipping pancakes at the Stampede last year. I mean, this is someone who doesn't even know how to make pancakes. He doesn't even know how to flip a pancake. Probably doesn't even know how to make scrambled eggs. So really, just in the best interest that he's not coming this year. I think it's good for the people of Alberta. We need a little bit of a break from the stench of corruption that he carries with him everywhere that he goes.
Well, since you mentioned it, we've got to see the clip. This is what happened when Justin Trudeau tried to do his man of the people shtick in Alberta last year.
Here we go. Look at that. All right, no pressure on me.
There's no pressure.
There we go. Golden brown.
There we go.
A little splash on that one. Now, this is not ready yet. Yeah, this one, here we go. There we go. Glad to do it. Those ones are not quite ready.
No, they gotta wait.
I like that he needs like the handler and the safety vest to like point to the pancake to flip. Like he's even that. I mean, look, simple things when you have an audience can be difficult. Like I don't, extrapolate from this any broad character flaw, except to say that that's pretty much a sign of where Justin Trudeau is when he tries to be an ordinary person.
It's sort of like when Jason Kenney, just before, his leadership review, which ultimately led to his resignation, was doing this announcement on pausing the fuel tax. This was like my first day ever reporting in Alberta. He was at a gas station and he went to fill up his truck and the gas pump got stuck in his vehicle and he couldn't get it out. And he was like pulling and pulling. And of course, then everyone was like, he doesn't fill up his own gas. It was obviously very embarrassing for him. But in this case, I just want to know the staffer that, inevitably got yelled at later for not double checking that the pancakes were ready to be flipped. Like, that someone just got reamed out for not being absolutely sure that it was time to flip the pancakes. I would say I feel bad for that staffer, but that's sort of what you get for working for the Liberal Party.
Yeah, I think the caption that went last year when that video clip went viral was, everything, he touches is destroyed or whatever. So there was something like that. Yeah, if you can't trust a man to flip your pancakes, how can you trust him to, save anything else in your country, right?
Well, then there was also the side-by-side comparison of him flipping the pancake and then Danielle Smith, just...
Oh, yeah, she was like flipping him over the shoulder.
She was tossing them into like a little like container or whatever. She was just passing them over every single time, made it in, and he can't even manage to flip one. So, yeah, those are the types of like the video images. And I mean, I would agree with you. When you're doing things on camera, it can go awry pretty quickly when it's live. We're lucky to film at home in studios with good lighting and technology. But I think the comparison was pretty apt as to everything Trudeau touches turning to ash.
Go ahead, Harrison.
It's amazing how times change. Just 2 years ago, he was mobbed by admirers at the Calgary Stampede. And now I guess they're going to have to go home unhappy. They have no one to cheer for in Alberta. So it's remarkable. I'm not surprised. He can't go anywhere in this country actually without getting heckled. It doesn't matter if he's in Toronto. It doesn't matter if he's in Alberta. Probably the same situation in Vancouver. Actually, I know it's the same situation. Everywhere he goes, he gets heckled. He's likely the most hated man in the country. So I'm not surprised. I think his time is obviously up. We're sort of entering into that territory of cabinet ministers and backbenchers leaking to the media, trying to get the message out that they want him to go. Even his own legacy media are turning on him and demanding that he holds a meeting with his caucus. So yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. It seems it's just that we're in the very final days of the long Trudeau story. I guess you could call it a nightmare, which would be more accurate.
Yeah, and I know there was a bit of the spin going out that, he can't do the Calgary Stampede because he's at the NATO summit in DC, which is true. He does have to be at the NATO summit. The Calgary Stampede is what, like 10 days, Rachel? Like, it's a long thing. Like, and the Calgary Stampede's already started, and he's not going to the NATO summit for another 3 days. Yeah, so he
time.
could have just,
Lots of
popped
time.
into Calgary on the way there, popped in on
Don't
the
give him
way
any
back.
ideas though, Andrew. Listen, we're happy he's not coming. He doesn't have time. It's fine. You don't need to come. No one misses you. You're not welcome here. Don't give him any ideas, Just be honest. So just be honest. Alberta doesn't like me. I don't like you. My political career is coming to an end. I don't think I'm ever going to have to come again, so might as well not go this year. Yada yada. That's it. We're done.
Yeah, there is a bit of a damned if you do, damned if you don't dilemma. And that, it's like funny to rag on him for not wanting to go there. But if he does go there, all the Albertans are like, no, we don't want you here. We don't like you. We don't. It was like the old thing that Nigel Farage used to say about the head of the European Commission. Is like, we don't know you. We don't want to know you.
Who are
basically
you?
Scram. Yeah, exactly. Oh, that we should have pulled out that clip for the Nigel Farage greatest hits as we talk
You have
UK
the charisma
election,
of a damp rag.
Exactly. Well, since we're on the subject, Harrison, why don't you give us the rundown on the big election on U.S. Independence Day in the UK?
Right, exactly. Well, the UK have a new prime minister. They have a new government. They're led by a Labour majority government led by Keir Starmer. And this result really surprised nobody. It wasn't as though there was some sort of tight contest between who would end up winning. The Conservatives over the past 14 years have abandoned the British people. They've abandoned all their core promises, opened up their borders to mass immigration, more immigration. And I think the last 4 or 5 years than the Brits have seen in the last 1,000 years, right? So we're dealing with a truly unprecedented situation. Transgender ideology, woke ideology, whatever you want to call it, has been injected into the military, into the public service. Britain is essentially unrecognizable today than before, I guess, David Cameron took office. Even under Tony Blair, that's when the mass immigration experiment really began, but it just got way worse under the Conservatives. The story, however, is not that the Conservatives have been destroyed, not that they've lost over 200 seats. The story is really reform. Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, have shocked, I think, even their supporters. They ended up winning over 14% of the popular vote. Now, they came third in the popular vote. They only ended up winning 4 seats. Compare that to the Liberal Democrats, who came fourth in the popular vote, winning 71 seats. It isn't quite right how this has shaken up, but the reality is Nigel Farage, he is in Westminster on the 8th time of trying. Talk about perseverance. He's got 3 other MPs that are going to sit with him in Westminster, and hopefully they can actually start to shape the Conservative Party into truly being conservative. I have this other point too, Andrew, before I send it back to you, that I'm hoping that Conservatives in Canada, both at a provincial level and a federal level, watch the results closely. Because after 14 years of not governing like Conservatives and governing more like Liberals and centrists, they got decimated. Their party is now faced with an existential crisis. There are several Conservative premiers in this country who have governed like Liberals. I'm looking at Doug Ford in particular, that may in fact end up facing a similar fate. They choose to not govern like Conservatives. So I hope that there was a good Canadian audience.
Yeah, the decline, I mean, this is the party of Churchill and Thatcher. And what's become of that party has become quite a tragic story in a lot of ways. And I mean, even Boris Johnson, I find to be a tremendously overrated political figure. He got Brexit done. He did a lot good, but he also was the one that committed the UK Conservatives to accepting the left's premise on all of these environmental policies that have been incredibly harmful and really will persist under a Labour government. And again, you had Rishi Sunak, who was elected by nobody. He was there because Liz Truss, who won the leadership, was defenestrated basically more quickly than a head of lettuce wilted. If you remember that gag that I think it was the UK Sun or the UK Mirror, whoever it was, did back then. But what ends up happening, and Liz Truss, by the way, loses her seat. Jacob Rees-Mogg loses his seat. You've got some big heavyweights in the UK Conservative benches that are not returning to Parliament. And what I find so fascinating about this is that I don't know if they're really going to learn their lesson immediately, because in Nigel Farage and Reform, and by the way, he was only the leader for 5 weeks? Like, he was a last minute entry.
I think less than that. Yeah.
Yeah, less than that. But he was inspired, and this is where it becomes very relevant to Canada's history. He was inspired by Preston Manning and the Canadian reform movement going back to the late 80s and the early 90s. And it's interesting when you see that and make that comparison, because the story of that was that the Reform Party eventually became the vehicle that created the modern Conservative Party, that pulled that party back to where it needed to be ideologically. Do you think, Rachel, that will replicate in the UK, that there will be this moment when the Reform Party and the UK Conservatives will have this merger, and perhaps a new, more viable Churchill-esque or Thatcher-esque entity will come out of it?
I think there's an argument to be made there because of the fact that Nigel Farage has his seat, that they have 3 other seats as well. So 4 in total. The question that I'm kind of wondering is whether we can draw any parallels between Reform and the PPC. We know that the PPC saw a surge in popularity during COVID. I think that that popularity has diminished significantly since then. I think that even when we look at Maxime Bernier as the leader of that party, people are seeming less excited about him. And in Canada, it's very difficult to start a new party and to see any success with that. But the fact here in the UK that Nigel actually has those 4 seats, they actually have a voice in Parliament, that is going to make a world from difference. It's up to him to see. I mean, he still doesn't have a ton of power, but what can he do with the voice that he has in Parliament? How effective can his small caucus be? I think that will really determine how they're able to shape the future of the Conservative Party in Britain and in the UK, and if they're able to actually have, effective advocacy and play a role in what the future of conservatism looks like in Britain.
Yeah, I think that the answer to that, you touched on it with talking about Parliament, because if Bernier had won a seat in his several attempts, whether it was in 2019, 2021, in the Portage-Lisgar by-election, totally different discussion we're having about the PPC. But the PPC, after having, nearly 6% of the vote in 2021, has decreased in relevance ever since then. Like, even the Toronto-St. Paul's by-election, they got, I think, 234 votes, like less than 1%. This is not a party that has managed to capture people. Again, popular vote is important. In a Westminster system, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans, though. It's important as a barometer of support, but you need an efficient vote. And the Lib Dems, to your point, Harrison, had a very efficient vote because they were concentrated in areas where they could win a lot of ridings. PPC had an inefficient vote. Reform had an inefficient vote. But the fact that they now are in Parliament makes it a night and day difference from the PPC.
It does. And there's a lot of difference between the PPC, of course, and Reform. Another thing that's worth highlighting is the number of seats in which Reform candidates came second to a Labour winner, right? That means they were outperforming the Tories in Northeast England, in parts of the Red Wall, that they called it, the Brexit Wall. And that shows that actually votes for the Tories were taking away from Reform votes. There is no real comparison that we can see in Canada to that situation. Also, it's important to highlight the differences between Nigel Farage and Maxime Bernier. Maxime Bernier talks about the right issues. I think it would be tough to deny that he's not the loudest political voice against mass immigration in our country, but he does not have the charisma and the ability to energize young Canadians and disenfranchised Anglo-Canadians the way that Nigel Farage does in the UK. The English is a barrier for Maxime Bernier. Nigel Farage is more popular in the UK than Bernier is in Canada. And Farage is probably more popular than Keir Starmer, and likely Rishi Sunak, if we're being honest. He is a star in the UK. His presence was what dragged that party over the line. Bernier doesn't have that same effect. And I do think that ultimately, when Pierre Poilievre does become prime minister, a party on the right in this country will be critical. It will be crucial to anchor a conservative government to the right and not allow them to drift further and further to the left, as is naturally the case. So if there can be some sort of reform-esque movement in Canada when we have a conservative government, I think that would be a good thing for the country, but it's not there right now.
Time to kick up the old Reform Party. The West wants in.
Well, but I think the future, it will depend a lot, because I think there are a lot of people that were part of the PPC or were sympathetic to the PPC that have rallied behind Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. So they're seeing a rightward drift, not a leftward drift. Now, if a government under Poilievre were to go in a different direction, I think you're right. You're going to see that, because people have gotten a lot less forgiving of politicians abandoning their roots now than they were even back in the 80s. So that's something to keep an eye out for sure. I also think, just speaking of Rishi Sunak, we have to put up this clip. This was him making his concession speech, and there was a YouTuber, I can't remember the YouTuber's name, because I'd never heard of him. I think it was like, it doesn't matter, it was Nico or something, but a known YouTube prankster that decided to really hammer home the fact that Rishi Sunak was the big loser of the night.
I'd also like to thank the police who have ensured that we can conduct this ballot here in North Yorkshire, but also across the country in safety. On this difficult night, I'd like to express my gratitude to the people of the Richmond and North Allerton constituency.
I like that the camera zooms in so you don't see the L. The L holder realizes it, tries to.
You have made me and my family feel so at home, and I look forward to continuing to serve as your Member of Parliament. It is an enormous privilege.
L, by the way, is the conventional acronym for loser.
Having to explain that, I'm afraid, reveals that our audience is quite old, I think.
Well, it's like the old, I mean, you're too young for it, both of you. It's like the old All-Star, what was it, the Smash Mouth?
We are not too young for that song.
Finger and her thumb in the shape of an L. Yeah. Oh, no, I just gave the people a screenshot to use against me. Anyway.
Yes. What we need to bring back the tradition of having all of the candidates in a local election be on the stage together when the count is read out and when the victor delivers a speech. There's something I just love the visuals of that. When you've got your legitimate candidates and then you've got your joke candidates. There's another video going around. We don't have time to pull it, but it's these jokers with fake names and fake party names,
like Count Binface.
Count Binface, of course, but that's the obvious one, and it's hilarious. It's a great thing. And if you lose an election, you have to stand there and listen to as you have lost. And listen to the victor deliver a speech. We have to bring that back. Imagine what that would look like in St. Paul's with 100 candidates.
I think it would give some people pause for putting their name forward, which we potentially could be a very good thing, especially in ridings like St. Paul's, where we had what was like 100 candidates or something ridiculous.
Yeah, as a protest. Yeah. By the way, Ray, just in my defense, Rachel, that song came out in 1999.
But have everyone seen the movie Shrek? I was literally listening to a friend's house the other day. Like, that's still a very popular song. Is that how people
know that song?
Yes,
they know it from
Shrek?
Yes.
From Shrek.
Yes.
Okay. I know that's how they know that, like, schmaltzy Rufus Wainwright. Well, it's the Leonard Cohen song originally, but Hallelujah, that also everyone knows from Shrek, even though it was a Leonard Cohen song.
I don't know about that reference as much, but definitely the Smash Bros song is popular.
Believe it or not, I used to always be the youngest person in a room, and now I feel like I'm ancient in the
20 years ago.
Yeah, anyway. All right. We'll go from the UK to the US. This was no point in talking about the ins and outs of who's up in Iowa and whatever just yet, but we can talk about what's become the real story of the last couple of weeks, which is the world finally realizing that Joe Biden is not fit to be president. Rachel, what was the latest gaffe?
So Biden speaking at a July 4th sort of party. First of all, it actually started even before he started talking. He was introduced by Vice President Kamala Harris, who appeared to at one point start to introduce Biden as the vice president. A little bit of a Freudian slip, if you ask me. I think she's just sort of standing there salivating at the thought of power as the world discusses when Joe Biden is going to step down, if he's going to step down, why he needs to step down. So she's obviously, her already big head is inflating even further at the thought of all the power that could soon be hers. So she appears to begin to introduce the president as the vice president, and then immediately Biden takes the mic and he says, "Ho, ho, ho." So, the speculation is rampant that he briefly mistook the Independence Day celebrations for Christmas Day, which if you watched any of the debate or if you've seen a Biden press conference in the last 4 years, you'd be pretty apt to believe as well this man does not know where he is a lot of the time. He does not know what he's saying. He's just really unsure of a lot of things. So it's not surprising that he mistook a hot July summer day for Christmas Day by any means. I think we have that clip. We should play it for the audience so they can see it for themselves and judge what they think happened there.
And we give thanks to our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, the extraordinary President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Ho, ho, ho. Happy Independence Day.
Maybe,
We're all
I don't think he thinks it's Christmas. But it's still just when you put it in the context of everything else, it's
the funniest part is the rest of them. He starts talking and they're all just like, what's he gonna say? What's he gonna say? And then as soon as he says Happy Independence Day, they're all like, they all relax. Like you can see their body language. They're all like, phew, he remembers where we are. He remembers what's going on, even if just for a couple seconds. You know, they're all, it's the funniest part of any time he's speaking is watching the body language of everyone else around him. Very uncomfortable, very tense. What's your take on the situation, Harrison?
Well, it's just what we've been seeing for the last 3 years is just pure chaos, it's ridiculous. When I was watching the debate, I was actually taken aback and refreshed by listening to CNN, the first 30 seconds of the CNN commentary after the debate, hearing a guy actually speak coherently and in full sentences. I felt like both of them, Trump and Biden, were just rambling on. They weren't answering any questions. It wasn't even clear. It's absurd. I'm reading this article right now. I just pulled it up on my computer from yesterday, 8 p.m. on CNN, that Biden tells Democratic governors he needs more sleep and plans to stop scheduling events after 8 p.m. Oh, I'm sure that's fine. We're all good, guys. The United States president is going to just stop working at 8 p.m. and get more sleep. The world is totally fine. Not like there are lives at risk and major wars taking place.
I mean, the only part
was kind of weirded out too by, we don't have the clip, but you can look it up yourself, when he did an interview on a Philly radio station, Joe Biden did, and he talked about how he was the first black president or the first black vice president. It was like he just, again, like, he's trying to sort of talk about appointing Kamala Harris, but it's like he just can't get out even the simplest of lines.
The only surprising part of that article that you just referenced, Aaron, is that Harrison, is that he was even working until 8 p.m. I assume that he retired far earlier in the evening. I mean, that was one of the worst debate performances. I haven't been around for too long. I'm not old like you, Andrew. So maybe you can think of some examples in history that were worse.
Oh, when Noah's on, though, you're like the old matron, basically. He calls you Ms.
Noah's the reason that I had to change my name, because I was tired of my colleagues referring to me as Mrs. Emmanuel. Like, that's my mom. Like, don't be gross. So if you're wondering the real reason why I had to change my name, you can all thank Noah for that later.
Blame Noah.
Yeah. But for example, the debate performance, I mean, there was reports coming out later on, the Biden team, they tried to kind of pin this on their staff, throw their staff under the bus, say that he was unprepared. But then the staff came out swinging and saying they took 6 days to prepare for that debate performance. He wouldn't get started until about 10:30, 11, and then he would have to take a nap in the afternoon. So he would basically work for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then he would have to take a nap in the afternoon. And now we know he's retiring at 8. So how many hours in the day does that leave for actual work to be getting done? I would peg it to maybe about 4 hours a day where he's actually awake and is somewhat able to make decisions, even though I highly suspect he's not the real person making decisions in the White House.
Yeah, you're probably right about that. We don't have too much time left, but I know you want to talk about this one, Harrison, and you were actually there and sustained a battle injury, which is how you know you've made it as a journalist when you've been attacked at a protest, which can be, I'm making light of it, but it can actually be incredibly risky to cover these things these days. What happened?
Right. So at the University of Toronto, these pro-Palestine protesters had been encamped at the university for over 2 months. And yesterday, I believe it was, 2 days ago. 2 days ago was the day they were to be evicted from their encampment. The police were granted an injunction to clear them out. And before the police even showed up, they all fled. They all dispersed. They ran away from the police. And they decided to hold a large march instead. And essentially, we were there to see what was going to happen when the police cleared out the protest. We all wanted to see what was actually going to take place. But what happened was that they just decided to do a large march around the university instead. We were there. We asked some people some questions, simple questions, like, do you feel the protest had been successful? What have you accomplished, if anything? Or have you accomplished anything at all? You know, the main effort of the protest was to have the university divest from companies. And I don't believe that the university has done anything in regards to that. So that would assume that they have not been successful. Anyway, upon asking some people some questions, we were moved over to the sidewalk of the march. And that's when we had some Antifa-type characters with black umbrellas.
Now, you say moved. Was this by police, by protesters, or you just naturally moved there on your own?
We just didn't want to be in the center of it. We tried to ask some people some questions, then we moved over to the sidewalk. And my cameraman and I were quickly encircled after asking a woman those exact same questions, because that's what we were there to do. And then we had umbrellas come over the top of both our cameras and into our backs, basically spearing my cameraman and I, as we tried to just get out of the way and get out of the mix. But that's just the way that these characters are behaving now. They've become emboldened. They know that they can get away with a lot. And they know that police aren't really watching what they're doing on the sidelines of the march. So it's astonishing to see it all take place. I will say, though, that if you are protesting a genocide and it's a really important cause, you would think that these protesters might stand their ground just for the actual day that it counts. But no, not for them. They fled.
Yeah, and it was interesting because QP Ontario, which has been like very much against Israel and supporting the protesters in the encampments, they were like urging people to go down. They were urging like more people to go there, but they cleared out on their own pretty much quickly. It was it stands in contrast to, say, the Freedom Convoy, where people notably used the rallying cry, "Hold the line." Now, I'm also of the mind that these people probably didn't want to be pepper sprayed and dragged out by their heels and whatever, but because that was their argument. But they said they were going to come back. They said they were going to return. Rachel, do you think they will?
They did.
I wouldn't be surprised. These people seem very dedicated to, really raising the alarm over this issue and drawing attention to it. I don't know what their reason was for why they left the camp in the night of. Maybe they thought they were going to be arrested. If it was simply that they didn't want to face police, that's another story, but I don't know the reasoning there. I'm not going to make assumptions. Obviously, Harrison, as far as them seeking to have companies divest from Israel, you said that wasn't successful. What I think we can all agree on is they have been successful in drawing a lot of attention to this issue. This has been going on for weeks, and we're still talking about it. We talk about it on the show very, very frequently. It's in frequent media coverage. So they definitely are successful at drawing attention to the issue. I think sometimes it's not helpful the way that we talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's sort of these these quick issues, the protesters, but people are not very informed on, I think, what's really going on there in the history of the whole issue. And that's just not the way that we've talked about what's happening right now. But Harrison, I think that you had an astute point as to the fact that they felt so emboldened that they were touching you, and were they hitting you, or they just put their umbrella over you? Either way, you are a reporter. You should have been able to go to that protest and to feel safe covering the incident. You should have been able to ask your questions. Sounds like you weren't asking any inflammatory questions. You were asking some very simple questions, trying to get information out. And I saw a video of you circulating online where you and your camera, and you actually had to kind of very quickly try to rush out of the crowd because you were no longer in a safe circumstance. And I think it's very shocking and disturbing that we're in a situation in Canada where people like yourself and myself, when we're going to go cover protests, we actually have to ask ourselves if it's going to be a safe environment for us. I don't think that should be the case at all.
Yeah, I mean, Sue Ann Levy, who we all work with, I mean, she's been very much threatened, and I don't know if she's been assaulted. Probably they've come close to it. And you look at some of these protest guys in the U.S., like Ford Fischer is one. He goes into films like all of these protests. He's got to basically go in full riot gear because it's the only way he can offer himself just a semblance of protection. Now, I don't know if True North needs to start issuing that when people are going out, but these things are legitimately, they get unhinged. Because I remember when I was covering it was the Republican convention in Cleveland. There was a group of protesters, and I went out, and very similar to you, Harrison, just tried to ask a couple of questions, and they wrapped me in this banner. It was very weird. It was actually quite comfortable if you overlooked the fact that these unwashed Antifa people were there. It was like a nice little seaweed wrap at a spa. They wrapped me in their banner, and then a few started coughing on me, and it was a very bizarre thing. I never felt physically threatened because I could probably have taken any one of them individually, but in that it's a mob-like mentality, and you see that when you're in the midst of this thing. It's quite something.
Absolutely. And I mean, not to make it just about that incident, but it's important to highlight this as well. The protest, a lot of the people there were holding signs about free university education. It had nothing to do with what they were protesting or what the media had made the protest out to be. One woman had a sign that said, "Israel is terrorist," those words. And then on the other side, it was "free university education now." And you had all these other protesters.
Sounds like she needs it. In her defense, sounds like she needs the education.
Yes, it does sound that way. And that seemed to be all the QP signs were about: free university education. It was a very bizarre situation. We don't cover the protests that much anymore, but at the beginning when they were starting, we would cover them, and we would do our job. We would try to ask them some questions and actually get their side of the story out. And it was sort of the second or third time that we had gone to the protest. This was several months ago, last year, that we were starting to get noticed. And it wasn't even what appeared to be Arabs who were accusing us of being in the wrong place and telling us to get lost. It was white Antifa masked up people who were attacking True North. And that was the case on Wednesday. It's like people who aren't even really, don't even have like a blood connection to the issue. They're just there because they want the chaos. They want the scene. It's a very bizarre situation.
Yeah, that always seems to be the way. The people that are the most fervent in these protests are never the ones directly affected by by the thing that they're protesting. That's, the story of Indigenous energy protests. It's like, 3 Indigenous people and then like 87, just woke British Columbians there. But anyway, that does it for us for today. My thanks to Harrison Faulkner and Rachel Parker for their contributions to today's program. Remember, everything you've heard is off the record. There, I got it right.
Nicely done. Honestly, I can't say anything. I'm still getting it wrong. When I go to record my show, I'm like, oh yeah, I changed my name.
Have you relearned your signature yet?
I haven't relearned my signature yet, but I am very relieved because ever since I was a kid, my last name was so long that somewhere in the middle of because I always do cursive, somewhere in about the third hump of the first M, I would start to get confused as to how many M humps I had done, and then the whole thing would just go to crap. So I'm really excited to not have to do the cursive M's anymore. It's like I can never keep track of how many I've done. It's my whole life I have not been able. I think on my show today I made an argument for my audience that I'm pretty sure I'm dyslexic. So there you have it. I most likely am.
I have terrible handwriting, and now that I am an author and have to do book signings, if I'm ever relevant enough in history that someone has to authenticate the autographs in my books, they're gonna have a heck of a time because I think every one of them is different.
Yeah, I don't know that that's gonna happen though, so don't worry about it too much.
Harrison, how's your handwriting? Do you have typical guy writing?
It's so bad. I'm embarrassed every time I have to write a card to someone. I have to just give them a warning in advance. Say, if you need me to read it over your shoulder out loud.
Do you do penmanship or do you print?
Is that penmanship?
Are you asking if I write cursive?
Cursive, yeah. I thought cursive was also penmanship.
I don't.
I print, yeah.
Penmanship, cursive is a lost art form. I think I still write in cursive. People can't even read it anymore.
I'm gonna read it. When I was in high school, there was this girl next to me that wanted to borrow my notes, and I had a crush on her, but so I couldn't show her my notes because I was embarrassed about my handwriting. It was so terrible. Anyway.